The sound of a hammer pounding an auction block silenced the restless crowd gathered in the dusty main square of Fort Benton, Montana on that scorching July afternoon in 1876. Clara Porter stood with her wrists bound, her blue calico dress soiled from days in Sheriff Wilkins' jail cell, her honey blonde hair falling in tangled waves around shoulders that refused to slump despite her circumstances. She blinked away tears as the auctioneer bellowed over the murmurs. Next item for sale to satisfy the outstanding debts of the late Thomas Porter, his widow. Age 25, strong constitution, educated, can cook, clean, and manage a household. Bidding starts at $50. Clara's stomach turned as she stared past the crowd to the rolling hills beyond. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a shopkeeper's wife with dreams of starting a family. Now, she was being sold like cattle to pay Thomas's hidden gambling debts that had surfaced after his sudden death from pneumonia. The bank had taken their general store, creditors had seized their modest home and possessions, and Sheriff Wilkins, claiming legal precedent from some obscure territorial statute, had decided her late husband's debts could be settled by selling her into servitude for a period of no less than 5 years. "Do I hear $50? $50 for the Porter widow," the auctioneer called, his voice carrying across the square where townsfolk she'd once considered friends now watched with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "50. Called out Hiram Dunn, the aging owner of the saloon who'd been eyeing Clara since she was 16. "60, countered Edgar Fleming, a rancher with a reputation for cruelty toward his workers. Clara closed her eyes, willing herself not to vomit as the bidding continued. She'd fought this God knew she'd fought. She'd gone to Judge Patterson, but he was in Hiram's pocket. She'd appealed to Reverend Miller, who'd offered prayers but no practical help. The territorial marshal was 3 weeks' ride away, and she had no family to speak of. $120. Hiram Dunn shouted triumphantly, his yellowed teeth showing beneath his greasy mustache. 130, called Edgar Fleming, not to be outdone. Clara's legs trembled beneath her skirts. Thomas had been a decent husband, if not particularly affectionate, but he'd kept his gambling a secret from her until it was too late. Now she was paying the price for his weakness. The auctioneer raised his gavel. 130 going once. $200. A hush fell over the crowd as heads turned toward the voice. Clara's eyes snapped open. A tall figure had pushed through to the front, a stranger in trail-worn clothes, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He stood with one hand resting casually on his holstered revolver, dust still clinging to his long coat from the trail. $200, he repeated, his voice steady and clear. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "I have 200 from the gentleman in the back. 200 going once." 300, Hiram shouted, his face reddening with anger and drink. The stranger didn't even glance at him. $500, he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and intense blue eyes that looked directly at Clara for the first time. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $500 was more than most men in the territory earned in a year. $500, stammered the auctioneer. "Going once, going twice." Clara stared at the stranger, unable to read his expression. Was he a wealthy rancher? A mine owner? Whatever his intentions, could they be worse than Hiram's or Edgar's? "Sold to the gentleman for $500. The stranger approached the auction block, pulling out a leather pouch. He counted out the gold coins methodically, placing them in the auctioneer's trembling hands. Then he turned to Sheriff Wilkins, who'd been watching the proceedings with smug satisfaction. "The paperwork," the stranger said, holding out his hand. Wilkins reluctantly produced a folded document. She's legally bound to you for 5 years, mister. Names required for the record. The stranger took the paper. Jackson Blackburn, he said, signing with quick strokes. Clara felt the blood drain from her face as Jackson approached her. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with the quiet, contained movements of a man accustomed to danger. When he stood before her, she noticed faint lines at the corners of his eyes. Not a young man, but not old either. Perhaps 30 or 35. Mrs. Porter, he said quietly, tipping his hat to her. Clara lifted her chin defiantly, despite the terror churning inside her. Mr. Blackburn. To her surprise, he reached for her bound wrists. With quick, efficient movements, he untied the rough hemp rope, his calloused fingers careful not to touch her skin more than necessary. When the bindings fell away, he stepped back. "You're your own woman now, Mrs. Porter," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for those nearby to hear. Then he tore the servitude contract in half, then quarters, then eighths, letting the pieces flutter to the dusty ground. Clara stared at him in disbelief, unconsciously rubbing her chafed wrists. "What?" Sheriff Wilkins stepped forward, his face purpling. "Now see here, Blackburn. You can't just—" Jackson's hand moved to his revolver, not drawing it, but resting there in clear warning. "I believe I just paid $500 for this woman's freedom. Unless Montana territory has suddenly outlawed manumission, there's nothing more to discuss." "The debts," Wilkins sputtered, "have been paid in full," Jackson finished firmly. "By me, to the sum of $500, which is more than the claimed amount." He turned back to Clara. "Your debts are cleared, Mrs. Porter. You're free to go wherever you please." Clara's mind whirled with confusion. Why would you? But she was interrupted by Hiram Dunn's angry voice. "This ain't right. I had a fair bid." "Take it up with the territorial court," Jackson replied without looking at him. Hiram lunged forward, grabbing for Clara's arm. "I've been waiting too long for this one," before his fingers could touch her. Jackson moved with startling speed. In one fluid motion, he stepped between them, caught Hiram's wrist, and twisted it just enough to make the older man gasp in pain. "The lady is not for sale," Jackson said softly, dangerously. "Not to you, not to anyone, ever again." He released Hiram, who stumbled back, clutching his wrist. The crowd had grown silent, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Jackson scanned the onlookers, his gaze steady and challenging. "Does anyone else have a problem with this woman's freedom?" No one spoke. Even Sheriff Wilkins seemed unwilling to push further. Jackson nodded once, then turned back to Clara. "Do you have belongings somewhere?" She shook her head, feeling strangely numb. "They took everything." Something flickered in his eyes, anger perhaps, or compassion. "Then let's get you away from here." He gestured toward the end of the street where a chestnut gelding waited, saddled and ready. Clara hesitated, her mind racing. Who was this man? Why had he done this? What did he want in return? Because men always wanted something, that was one lesson life had taught her thoroughly. "Mrs. Porter," he said, his voice gentler now, "I understand your caution, but I suggest we leave before the sheriff finds some other legal pretense to detain you." He was right. With a deep breath, Clara nodded and began walking beside him toward his horse, acutely aware of the townspeople's stares following them. She could hear the whispers starting already. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," she managed to say as they reached his horse. "But I don't understand why you would. We can talk later," he interrupted, glancing back at the crowd that still watched them. "Right now we need distance between you and this town." He untied a bundle from his saddle and handed it to her. "Here, a blanket and canteen. I'll walk if you'll ride." Clara stared at the offered items, then at the man himself. Everything about this situation defied logic or experience, but something in his steady gaze made her reach for the bundle. "I can walk too. I'm not delicate." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Never thought you were, madam. Not after what you've endured. But it's 10 miles to the next settlement, and those shoes won't make it half that distance." Looking down at her worn boots, Clara knew he was right. She nodded reluctantly and allowed him to help her mount, settling awkwardly side-saddle in the absence of a proper riding skirt. Jackson gathered the horses' reins and began leading them out of town, his long strides eating up the distance as Clara clung to the saddle horn, feeling both terrified and oddly liberated. They traveled in silence until Fort Benton had disappeared behind them, the road winding through rolling hills covered in summer-dried grass that whispered in the late afternoon breeze. Only then did Clara find her voice again. "Mr. Blackburn, I appreciate your intervention, but I have to ask, why did you do it? You don't know me." He walked for several paces before answering. "I know enough. I know what it's like to be treated as property." His voice held no emotion, but something in his posture suggested old wounds. "No person should be sold to pay another's debts." "That's a rare sentiment in these parts," Clara observed carefully. "I've seen too much to believe that owning people is ever justified." He paused. "I was passing through, heard about the auction, couldn't ride away." $500 is a fortune to spend on principle, Mr. Blackburn." He shrugged. "Money's just money." Clara studied his profile, trying to reconcile this man's actions with everything she knew about the world. Men didn't spend small fortunes freeing strange women without expecting something in return. And yet, there was something in his manner that didn't suggest ulterior motives. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "There's a settlement called Miller's Creek about 10 miles east. They've got a decent boarding house. You can stay there while you decide your next steps. And then you do whatever you want. You're your own woman now, Mrs. Porter." There was that phrase again, your own woman, as if she had ever truly been that before. As a daughter, then a wife, and finally as collateral for her husband's debts, Clara had always belonged to someone else in some fashion. The concept of true independence was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Call me Clara, please," she said quietly. "After what you've done, formality seems unnecessary." He glanced up at her, those blue eyes briefly meeting hers. "Jackson, then." They continued in companionable silence as the afternoon slowly faded toward evening. Clara found herself studying her rescuer more carefully. His clothes were quality, but well-worn, a dark blue shirt under the dusty duster, serviceable denim pants, and boots that had seen many miles. His revolver was a Colt, worn in a worn leather holster that suggested regular use. The way he moved, always alert to their surroundings, spoke of a man accustomed to danger. "You're not just passing through, are you?" she asked suddenly. Jackson's stride faltered slightly before resuming. "What makes you say that? You knew about the auction. You knew the territorial laws. You came prepared with enough money to outbid anyone in town." A faint smile touched his lips. "Observant. I ran a general store with my husband for 5 years. You learn to read people." Jackson was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I've been tracking someone. My path led to Fort Benton. Someone dangerous." "Yes." The simple affirmation sent a chill through Clara. "Is that why you carry that Colt like it's part of your arm?" This time his smile was more pronounced. "That obvious?" "To anyone watching, yes. I was a marshal before the war," he said, offering the information like a small gift. "Old habits." The revelation made certain things clearer: his confidence in confronting the sheriff, his knowledge of the law, the way he carried himself. "And now," she prompted. "Now I work for the Pinkerton Agency sometimes. Other times I handle private matters. A bounty hunter then, or something similar." Clara absorbed this information, wondering what kind of man he was tracking that would lead him to their small town. "Was your quarry in Fort Benton?" she asked. Jackson shook his head. "Just passing through like him. I'm a day behind, maybe two." "Then I've delayed you," Clara realized with sudden dismay. "You spent money you likely needed, and now you're losing time escorting me." "It was my choice," he interrupted firmly. "And some things are more important than a bounty." The simple declaration warmed something inside Clara that had been cold since Thomas's death, since before that, if she were honest with herself. Her marriage had been convenient and stable, but never warm. As the sun began to set, Jackson led them off the main trail toward a small copse of cottonwood trees near a creek. "We should make camp," he said. "We won't reach Miller's Creek before nightfall." Clara stiffened slightly. Despite his honorable actions so far, the prospect of camping alone with a stranger, a man she had known for mere hours, sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach. Jackson seemed to sense her discomfort. "I'll sleep on the other side of the fire," he said matter-of-factly. "You'll have the blanket. I have my bedroll." He helped her down from the horse, careful to maintain a respectful distance once her feet touched the ground. Clara stood awkwardly, unsure of her role in this situation. With Thomas, camp duties had been clearly divided. She cooked and cleaned. He handled the horses and security. "I can prepare something to eat," she offered, falling back on familiar patterns. "I have jerky and hardtack," Jackson replied, leading his horse to the creek. "Not much of a meal, but it'll do for tonight. Tomorrow we can get you proper food at Miller's Creek." While he unsaddled and tended to his horse, Clara gathered wood for a fire, grateful for the simple, useful task. Her mind still whirled with questions about this man and her own uncertain future, but physical work provided a momentary respite from her thoughts. By the time darkness fell completely, they had a small fire crackling, and Jackson had arranged his bedroll on one side, leaving Clara the blanket he'd given her earlier. They sat across from each other, sharing his simple provisions in silence. "What will you do?" he asked finally, his face half illuminated by the flickering firelight. "After Miller's Creek, I mean." Clara stared into the flames. It was a question she'd been asking herself since the moment he'd torn up the servitude contract. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I had was in Fort Benton. The store, our home. I have no family elsewhere to go to. No parents, siblings." She shook her head. "My father died in '61 fighting for the Union. My mother passed 2 years later, typhoid. I was 16. I worked as a teacher's assistant until I met Thomas when I was 19. And his family? None that claimed him after his debts were revealed." Clara's fingers twisted in her skirt. "It seems I truly am on my own now." Jackson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something like understanding. "Freedom can feel that way at first," he said quietly. "But it's better than the alternative. You sound like you speak from experience." He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "There are opportunities for a woman of your abilities. Denver's growing fast, or San Francisco, places where a widow with education could find respectable work. With no references, no money for train passage." Clara shook her head. "Be realistic, Mr. Blackburn Jackson. My options are limited." $500 might help with that," he said, reaching into his coat to produce a leather pouch similar to the one he'd used at the auction. Clara stared at it, then at him. "What are you talking about?" "The money I was going to use for the bounty I'm chasing." He tossed the pouch across to her. It landed with a heavy clink in her lap. "It's yours." She opened the pouch with trembling fingers to find gold coins inside, more money than she'd ever handled at once. "I can't accept this," she whispered, looking up at him in shock. "You've already done enough by freeing me. Consider it restitution for what was taken from you unjustly." But your bounty I'll manage." His tone suggested the subject was closed. Clara clutched the pouch, torn between desperate need and pride. "Why are you doing this? The truth this time." Jackson poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. When he finally looked up, his expression was difficult to read. "6 years ago, I was tracking a man who'd robbed a bank in Kansas City. Trail led me to a small town in Nebraska. When I got there, I found they were auctioning off a young woman couldn't have been more than 20. Her husband had stolen horses, been shot while escaping. Town decided his wife should pay his debts." Clara's breath caught. "What happened?" "I didn't have enough money to outbid the saloon owner who wanted her." His voice remained steady, but Clara saw his hand tighten on the stick. "I telegraphed the federal marshal, but by the time he arrived 3 days later, she'd hanged herself in the saloon owner's back room." The quiet words hung in the night air between them. Clara found herself blinking back tears for a woman she'd never known. "I promised myself I'd never stand by again," Jackson concluded simply. "So the money is yours. Use it to build something new." Clara closed the pouch carefully. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing the words were inadequate for what he'd given her. More than money, he'd given her dignity. Choice. A future. Later, as she lay wrapped in his blanket with the fire dying between them, Clara watched Jackson's still form across the embers. His breathing had evened out, suggesting sleep, but she suspected he remained as alert as ever. "Jackson," she called softly. "Hum." He didn't move, but his voice was immediately responsive. "Who are you chasing? The bounty, I mean." There was a long pause before he answered. "A man named Victor Sloan. He worked for your husband's creditor, Coleman Hayes." Clara sat up abruptly. "Hayes." "The man who claimed Thomas owed him $300. The same." Jackson's voice had hardened. "Except your husband never owed him anything. Hayes and his men, including Sloan, have been running this scheme across 3 territories. They find a business owner, usually one who occasionally gambles. When the man dies or is killed, they produce forged IOUs and demand payment from the widow or family." Anger flared hot in Clara's chest. "Are you saying Thomas didn't that I was sold to pay a debt that never existed?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Jackson sat up now too, his face grim in the dying firelight. "I've been tracking Sloan for 4 months. Hayes is harder to catch. He stays in Denver, sends his men to do the dirty work. But Sloan got greedy, killed a man in Wyoming who fought back against the scheme. That's put a bounty on his head I mean to collect." Clara's mind raced with this new information. Sheriff Wilkins must have been part of it, and Judge Patterson. They both supported Hayes's claim without question. "Small-town officials often get a cut," Jackson confirmed. "It's why the scheme works." "So Thomas never gambled away our livelihood." Clara's voice cracked slightly. "All this time I thought." "People believe what they're told, especially when it comes from authority figures," Jackson said gently. "You couldn't have known." Clara lay back down, her mind spinning with revelations. Her husband's reputation, her own suffering, all based on a cruel fraud. The injustice of it burned like fire in her veins. "When you catch this Sloan," she said into the darkness, "what will happen to him? He'll hang for murder if I take him to Wyoming. Or I could deliver him to the federal marshal in Denver, where he might provide evidence against Hayes. And Hayes, without evidence linking him directly to the murders, he'll likely face fraud charges, prison time, but probably not hanging." Clara stared up at the star-filled sky, a new resolve forming within her. "I want to help you," she said firmly. Across the dying fire, she heard Jackson shift. "What?" "I want to help you catch Sloan. And Hayes. I want justice for Thomas, for myself, and for all the other widows they've victimized. It's dangerous work, Clara." I've just spent 3 weeks in jail, been sold at auction, and learned my entire life was destroyed by fraud, she responded, steel in her voice. I think I can handle danger. There was a long silence and then, to her surprise, a low chuckle from Jackson's side of the camp. I believe you probably can, he said, something like admiration in his tone. We'll talk more about it tomorrow. Get some sleep now. Clara closed her eyes, but sleep was long in coming. For the first time in weeks, her mind was alive with purpose rather than despair. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new directions, and perhaps the first steps toward justice. When dawn broke over the eastern hills, Clara awakened to find Jackson already up, brewing coffee over a freshly built fire. He nodded a greeting as she sat up, smoothing her tangled hair self-consciously. "Morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. He handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "Sleep well. Better than in the jail cell," she replied with a small smile, accepting the cup gratefully. The hot liquid revived her spirits as much as her body. "Have you reconsidered my offer to help?" Jackson regarded her thoughtfully over his own cup. "It's not that I doubt your determination, Clara, but going after Sloan would mean abandoning the fresh start I just gave you the means to make. A fresh start built on running away from injustice doesn't appeal to me," she countered. "Besides, I know what Hayes looks like. I met him once when he came to our store demanding payment. I could identify him in Denver when the time comes. You'd be willing to testify." "I'd be willing to do considerably more than that," Clara said firmly. "But yes, I'll testify." Jackson studied her for a long moment. "It would mean traveling with me. People would talk." Clara laughed without humor. "After being sold at auction in front of half the town. I think my reputation has endured worse blows than being seen with a bounty hunter." "Fair point." He set his cup down and began rolling up his bedding. "If you're serious, we need to adjust our plan. Miller's Creek is east. Sloan was headed west toward Helena." "Then we go west," Clara said decisively, standing to fold her blanket. She paused, looking down at her dirty, wrinkled dress with distaste. "Though I'll need something else to wear if we're tracking a criminal. I can't exactly move quickly in this." Jackson nodded. "There's a trading post about 3 hours' ride from here. We can get supplies there." They broke camp efficiently, with Clara insisting on doing her share of the work despite Jackson's protestations. As they prepared to leave, Clara eyed the horse with consideration. "We'll make better time if we both ride," she said practically. "I'm not heavy and your horse looks strong enough for two." Jackson raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "We'll take turns walking to spare him," he conceded, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. Clara stiffened momentarily at the unfamiliar proximity. She could feel the solid warmth of Jackson's chest just behind her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. It had been a long time since she'd been this close to a man, and never one who wasn't her husband. "All right?" Jackson asked quietly, seeming to sense her tension. "Yes," she managed, forcing herself to relax. "Just adjusting." They set off at a steady pace, following a trail that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with occasional stands of pine and cottonwood. Clara gradually grew accustomed to the rhythm of shared riding, even finding a certain comfort in Jackson's solid presence behind her. "Tell me more about Sloan," she said after they'd been traveling for about an hour. "What should I expect?" "He's dangerous," Jackson replied, his voice close to her ear. "Not particularly tall, but strongly built. Dark hair, beard, missing the top joint of his left little finger. Always carries a knife in his boot besides his gun." "How does the scheme usually work?" Clara asked. "For future reference, so I'm not caught unaware again." Jackson's tone became more businesslike. "They research their targets carefully, Look for business owners who are known to take an occasional card game or drink. They falsify gambling debts, sometimes backdated by months or years. When the target dies either naturally or with their help, they swoop in with their forged documents before the widow has time to properly grieve. Most women, especially in small towns with corrupt officials, have no recourse. And if the widow can't pay— Jackson's silence told Clara everything before he finally answered. They find alternative forms of payment, servitude, property. Sometimes they force the women to work in their saloons or worse establishments. Clara shuddered, understanding what he left unsaid. And you've been tracking this operation for how long? 2 years, on and off. Started as a Pinkerton job to investigate a suspicious death in Colorado, but the deeper I dug, the bigger it got. Hayes is careful, keeps his hands clean while men like Sloan do the dirty work. How many victims? That I know of. At least 15 widows across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana territories. Probably more I haven't connected yet. The number stunned Clara into momentary silence. 15 women whose lives had been destroyed as hers nearly was. 15 families robbed of their dignity and futures. The scope of the injustice strengthened her resolve. "We'll stop them," she said with quiet determination. "All of them." Jackson didn't respond immediately, but his arms seemed to tighten slightly around her, a gesture that might have been reassurance or protection, perhaps both. By midday, they reached the trading post, a weathered wooden building with a corral and small stable attached. Clara dismounted stiffly, her legs unaccustomed to riding horseback. Jackson tied his gelding to the hitching post and offered her his arm for balance as she found her footing. "Let me do the talking," he said quietly. "Best if people don't connect you with what happened in Fort Benton." Inside, the trading post was dimly lit but well stocked. A heavy-set man with an impressive beard stood behind the counter, eyeing them with the cautious interest of someone who survived by reading people quickly. "Afternoon," the trader greeted them. "What brings you folks out this way?" "Supplies," Jackson answered simply. "Heading west." While Jackson negotiated for provisions, Clara browsed the store's limited selection of clothing. She selected a practical dark blue skirt that would allow freer movement than her current one, a sturdy white blouse, and after some hesitation, a pair of men's denim trousers that she could wear under her skirt for riding. The trader raised his bushy eyebrows when she brought her selections to the counter. "Unusual choices for a lady," he commented. "My wife has practical tastes," Jackson interjected smoothly before Clara could respond. "We've got a long journey ahead." Clara shot him a quick glance but played along, understanding the protection his claim offered. A single woman traveling with a man who wasn't her husband would raise questions they didn't need. By the time they left the trading post, they had a week's worth of supplies, new clothing for Clara, and a small revolver that Jackson insisted she should carry. Behind the building, Clara changed into her new clothes while Jackson waited with the horse, feeling immeasurably better in clean garments even if the trousers beneath her skirt felt strange. "Your wife?" she questioned with raised eyebrows when she rejoined him. Jackson looked faintly embarrassed. "Seemed simpler than explanations. I should have warned you first." "It's fine," Clara assured him, securing her hair into a neater bun with the pins she'd also purchased. "It makes sense for our cover." They continued westward, making good time with their fresh supplies. Jackson taught Clara the basics of handling her revolver when they stopped for a brief rest, his instructions clear and patient. She absorbed his teachings eagerly, determined to be an asset rather than a burden in their pursuit. "You're a natural," he commented as she hit 3 out of 5 targets during their impromptu shooting lesson. "Good eye." "I used to shoot with my father," Clara explained, reloading carefully as he'd shown her. Before the war, he believed women should know how to defend themselves. Wise man. As evening approached, they found a sheltered spot to make camp near a small stream. Their routine established more naturally this time, with Clara gathering firewood while Jackson tended to the horse and set up their bedrolls. Over a supper of beans and salt pork, Jackson spread out a worn map between them. "Sloane was headed toward Helena last I heard," he explained, tracing the route with his finger. "Probably has another victim lined up there. If we push hard, we might catch up to him before he causes more harm." Clara studied the map thoughtfully. "How do you usually approach him, given that he knows you're after him?" "Carefully," Jackson replied with a grim smile. "I try to get to the target before he does, warn them, or I watch and wait for him to make a move that gives me legal cause to take him in." "That's why you prefer to capture rather than kill," Clara observed. "For the evidence against Hayes." Jackson nodded. "Hayes is the real snake in this. Sloane's dangerous, but he's a tool. Taking down Hayes would stop the entire operation." Clara tucked her legs beneath her, considering their options. "What if I approached Sloane? He wouldn't know me or suspect me." Jackson's head snapped up, his expression instantly hardening. "Absolutely not. Hear me out," she insisted. "I could pose as a recent widow. Perhaps let it be known I inherited money from my husband. Draw him out." "It's too dangerous. You said yourself that Sloane selects his targets carefully. It could take weeks for him to make a move if we just watch and wait. And it could take seconds for him to kill you if he suspects anything," Jackson countered, his voice tight with concern. "These men don't hesitate to eliminate problems." "I'm not suggesting I confront him alone," Clara clarified. "You'd be nearby. But having me as bait could draw him out more quickly." Jackson stared at her across the fire, conflict evident in his expression. "You don't know what these men are capable of." "I have a fairly good idea," she replied quietly. "They nearly sold me into servitude based on fraudulent debts. They've done the same or worse to 14 other women. I understand the risk, Jackson, but I also understand what's at stake." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of night creatures beginning their chorus. "We'll consider it," Jackson finally conceded, though his expression remained troubled. "But only if we can develop a plan with minimal risk to you, and I have final say on whether we proceed." Clara nodded, accepting his terms. It was more than she'd expected him to agree to. They fell into companionable silence as the darkness deepened around them. Clara found herself studying Jackson's face in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the faint scar near his right temple, the way his eyes reflected the flames. In just 2 days, this man had transformed from stranger to ally, rescuer to partner. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured after a while. Jackson glanced up from the map he'd been refolding. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough." Clara drew her blanket around her shoulders against the cooling night air. "You mentioned being a marshal before the war. Which side did you fight for?" "Union," he answered simply. "Cavalry, mostly. You?" "My sympathies were with the Union. My father died at Shiloh." Jackson nodded solemnly. "I was at Shiloh, second day of battle. Were you?" Clara hesitated, then pressed on. "Were you ever married?" This time the silence lasted longer, and Clara was about to apologize for overstepping when he finally spoke. "Yes, her name was Elizabeth. We married in '59. Something in his tone made Clara tread carefully. "And now, she died in '64, cholera." His voice remained steady, but Clara noticed how his hands stilled their movement. "Our son, too. He was 3. The simple statement carried such weight that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Truly." Jackson nodded once in acknowledgement but offered no further details. Clara didn't press. They both carried losses, she realized different in nature but similar in the empty spaces they left behind. "We should get some rest," Jackson said finally, effectively closing the subject. "We've got a long ride tomorrow if we want to reach the next settlement by nightfall." Clara settled onto her bedroll, watching as Jackson banked the fire for the night. "Thank you," she said softly as he moved toward his own blankets. He paused. "For what?" "For telling me about Elizabeth and your son. For trusting me with that." In the dim glow of the dying fire, she thought she saw something soften in his expression. "Good night, Clara," he said simply. "Good night, Jackson." As she drifted toward sleep, Clara found herself reflecting on the strange turns life could take. 3 days ago, she had been a prisoner awaiting sale, her future narrowed to a choice between terrible options. Now she lay beneath the vast Montana sky, a free woman with purpose and agency, riding toward danger by choice rather than compulsion. And beside her, separated by just a few feet of earth and a dying fire, was a man who had given her back her life without asking anything in return. For the first time since Thomas's death, Clara fell asleep with hope warming her chest alongside the lingering sadness. They traveled for 3 more days, establishing a rhythm as comfortable as any partnership of long standing. They alternated riding and walking to spare Jackson's horse, shared the camp duties without discussion, and gradually exchanged more pieces of their histories during the long hours on the trail. Clara learned that Jackson had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith who taught him the trade before he'd chosen a different path. He'd become a town marshal in Kansas at 23, married Elizabeth at 25, and lost her 4 years later while he was away fighting. After the war, unable to face the empty house they'd shared, he drifted west and eventually found purpose working for the Pinkerton Agency. In turn, Clara told him about her childhood in Ohio, her father's progressive views on education for women, and her brief career as a teacher's assistant before marrying Thomas. She spoke of her marriage with honest assessment. It had been a partnership of convenience and mutual respect rather than passion. But Thomas had been kind in his way, and she had been content until his death revealed the fragility of her security. By the time they reached the outskirts of a small settlement called Cooper's Ridge on the 4th day, Clara felt she knew Jackson better than she had known her husband of 5 years. The realization was disconcerting. Cooper's Ridge consisted of little more than a wide spot in the road with a general store, a small hotel, a livery, and a saloon. It was the type of place travelers stopped for a night before moving on, exactly the kind of settlement where Sloane might pause in his journey toward Helena. "We'll stay at the hotel," Jackson decided as they rode into town late in the afternoon. "Ask around casually about travelers passing through. If Sloane's been here, someone will remember him." The hotel was a simple 2-story building with peeling paint and crooked shutters, but the interior was surprisingly clean. The proprietress, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, looked them over with professional assessment as they approached the front desk. "Room for you and the missus." She asked Jackson directly. Clara tensed slightly, but Jackson simply nodded. "Just for the night. We're headed to Helena." $2 includes breakfast," the woman replied, sliding a registry book toward him. "Sign here." Jackson signed with a fictitious surname, Brennan, listing them as Mr. and Mrs. from Denver. Clara watched the casual deception with interest, noting how naturally falsehoods came to him when necessary for their mission. Their room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and single chair. Clara stood awkwardly just inside the doorway as Jackson set down their packs. "I'll take the floor," he said immediately, correctly reading her discomfort. We should maintain our cover in public, but privacy is different. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Clara's chest. "Thank you," she said, moving to place her bundle on the bed. "What's our next step?" "I'll visit the saloon, see what information I can gather." "You should stay here, rest." Clara frowned. "I can help. Let me come with you." "A respectable woman in a frontier saloon will draw attention we don't need," Jackson countered gently. "Besides, if Sloane is there, he might recognize me, but he definitely won't know you. Better to keep you in reserve." Though frustrated, Clara acknowledged the logic of his argument. "Fine, but don't treat me like porcelain, Jackson. I'm tougher than I look." A smile touched his lips. "I've never doubted that for a moment, Clara Porter. Get some rest. I'll bring food back with me." After he left, Clara washed away the dust of travel as best she could with the basin and pitcher provided, then changed into her clean blouse. Despite her intention to remain alert, the soft bed proved too tempting after days of sleeping on the ground. She lay down just for a moment and promptly fell into a deep sleep. She awoke to the sound of the door opening. Disoriented, she sat up quickly, reaching instinctively for the revolver beneath her pillow before recognizing Jackson's familiar silhouette. "It's just me," he said softly, closing the door behind him. He carried a tray with covered plates. "I brought supper. Didn't mean to wake you." Clara relaxed, noting through the window that dusk had fallen while she slept. "I didn't mean to doze off," she admitted, smoothing her rumpled blouse. "Did you learn anything?" Jackson set the tray on the small table by the window and lit the room's oil lamp. In its warm glow, Clara could see tension in his features that hadn't been there earlier. "Sloane was here," he confirmed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Left yesterday morning, according to the bartender, but that's not all." He pulled out the chair for her, then perched on the edge of the bed. "He wasn't alone." Clara sat, uncovering a plate of beef stew and biscuits. "What do you mean?" "He was traveling with a woman. Young, well-dressed." The bartender said she seemed uncomfortable, nervous. Jackson's jaw tightened. Sloane introduced her as his sister, but the bartender didn't believe it, said the girl flinched whenever Sloane touched her. A cold feeling settled in Clara's stomach. "You think she's one of his victims?" "A widow he's coerced, or the daughter of one." The bartender thought she couldn't be more than 20. Jackson's eyes met hers, troubled and determined. "Either way, it changes things. We need to move faster than I planned." Clara nodded, her earlier hunger forgotten. "How far ahead are they?" "A day, maybe less if they're traveling slowly." Jackson reached for his own plate but seemed to have little appetite. "We'll leave at first light, try to catch them before they reach Helena." "And if we do," Jackson's expression turned grim. "Then I take Sloane into custody, by whatever means necessary, and ensure the girl is safe." That night, Clara lay awake long after Jackson had settled on his bedroll on the floor. The knowledge that another woman was in Sloane's clutches, potentially suffering as Clara herself nearly had, filled her with renewed purpose and anxiety. She found herself listening to Jackson's steady breathing, drawing comfort from his presence even as she worried about what the next day might bring. Dawn found them already on the road, having left Cooper's Ridge as the first gray light appeared on the horizon. They pushed harder than before, stopping only when necessary to rest the horse. Jackson was quieter than usual, his focus turned inward as they followed the main trail toward Helena. By mid-afternoon, they reached a point where the road forked, one branch continuing toward Helena, the other veering north toward a mining settlement called Blackwater. Jackson reined in the horse, studying the tracks in the dust. "Two horses went north," he said after a moment, pointing to faint impressions in the dry earth. "One carrying double weight from the depth of the prints." "Sloane and the girl," Clara guessed. Jackson nodded grimly. heading for Blackwater instead of Helena. That changes my assessment of the situation. How so? Blackwater is smaller, more isolated, if he's taking her there. He didn't finish the thought, but his expression darkened. We need to move quickly. They followed the northern fork, the terrain growing more rugged as they approached the foothills. By evening, with no sign of their quarry, Jackson reluctantly called a halt to make a cold camp, unwilling to risk a fire that might announce their presence. They shared jerky and hardtack in the gathering darkness, sitting close together for warmth. Clara could feel the tension radiating from Jackson, his usual calm demeanor replaced by coiled vigilance. "What's in Blackwater that would draw him there?" she asked quietly. Jackson was silent for a long moment. "It's a company town controlled by mining interests. Law is whatever the mine owners say it is." He looked at her directly. "And one of the largest shareholders is a man named James Coleman." Clara stared at him. "Coleman Hayes's real name?" "His middle name, yes, James Coleman Hayes. He maintains mining interests throughout the territory under various names and partnerships. Blackwater is one of his." "So Sloane is taking the girl to Hayes," Clara concluded, the implications sending a chill through her that had nothing to do with the night air. "Why? Ransom? Or to make her disappear," Jackson said bluntly. "If she's witnessed something or knows something that could implicate Hayes." He left the sentence unfinished, but Clara understood. "Then we're running out of time." Jackson nodded once, sharply. "At first light, we separate. I'll go directly into Blackwater, see if I can locate Sloane. You'll circle around to the south edge of town and wait for my signal." Clara frowned. "That's not much of a plan. What signal? How will I know where to find you? What if something goes wrong?" "It's not ideal," Jackson acknowledged, "but we're improvising now. I can move more quickly and less conspicuously alone. If Sloane sees you with me, he'll know something's wrong immediately." "And if Sloane sees you, he'll know something's wrong," Clara pointed out. "He knows you're hunting him." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What would you suggest?" Clara thought for a moment, drawing on her knowledge of small frontier towns. "Let me go in first," she proposed. "As we discussed before, I'll pose as a widow passing through. I can make inquiries at the hotel, the general store, places a woman wouldn't draw suspicion. I might learn where Sloane is staying without alerting him." Jackson started to shake his head, but Clara pressed on. "He doesn't know me, Jackson. To him, I'm just another potential victim. I can gather intelligence without raising alarms, which you can't do. And meanwhile, you can position yourself where you'll be most effective when we locate him." The struggle was evident in his expression, the logical acceptance of her plan warring with his protective instincts. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "But we establish clear parameters. You don't approach Sloane directly. You don't take unnecessary risks. You gather information only, then report back to me at the south edge of town by noon." "Agreed," Clara said, relief flooding through her that he'd accepted her proposal. "And you keep your revolver with you at all times," he added firmly. "I wasn't planning to leave it behind," she replied with a small smile, trying to lighten his mood. Jackson didn't smile back. Instead, he reached across the space between them to take her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with unexpected gentleness. "Be careful, Clara," he said, his voice low and intense. "I didn't save you from one fate just to lose you to another." The simple statement and the warmth of his hand around hers sent a flutter through Clara's chest that had nothing to do with their dangerous situation. "I'll be careful," she promised softly. "I have no intention of becoming another victim." They sat there for a long moment, hands linked in the darkness, neither speaking but both drawing strength from the connection. Finally, Jackson released her hand and stood. We should get some rest, he said, his voice returning to its usual practical tone. Tomorrow will test us both. Clara nodded, settling onto her blanket with her revolver close at hand. But sleep was elusive, her mind racing with plans and contingencies, and with the lingering warmth of Jackson's hand around hers. Morning dawned clear and cold, the first hint of autumn crispness in the air despite the summer date. They broke camp quickly, reviewing their plan one last time before Clara mounted the horse for her solo ride into Blackwater. "Remember," Jackson said as he adjusted her saddle, his face grim with concern, "noon at the south edge of town, near the large cottonwood we spotted yesterday. If you're not there, I'm coming in after you." Clara nodded, checking that her revolver was secure in the pocket of her skirt, hidden but accessible. "I'll be there," she promised, "with information that will help us free that girl and capture Sloane." Jackson stepped back, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Clara," he began, then hesitated. "Yes," he shook his head slightly. "Nothing, just be safe." She offered him a reassuring smile. "You too." With that, she turned the horse toward Blackwater, feeling Jackson's eyes on her back as she rode away. The weight of their mission settled firmly on her shoulders, not just justice for herself now, but rescue for an innocent young woman caught in the same web of exploitation that had nearly claimed Clara. Blackwater appeared on the horizon after an hour's ride, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled in a narrow valley, dominated by the scaffolding of a mine entrance on the hillside above. Even from a distance, Clara could see it was a rough place, lacking the modest attempts at civilization that marked more established settlements. She straightened her spine, adjusted her bonnet, and rode directly down the main street, adopting the slightly uncertain air of a respectable woman traveling alone. Heads turned as she passed. Women were scarce in mining towns, and newcomers always drew attention. Clara kept her expression neutral, neither inviting nor discouraging interest, as she made her way to what appeared to be the town's only hotel. The Dakota Hotel was a 3-story wooden structure that had seen better days. Clara dismounted carefully, tying her horse to the hitching post before climbing the warped steps to the entrance. Inside, the lobby was dim and smoky, furnished with mismatched chairs and a scarred reception desk. A balding man with suspenders looked up from his ledger as she entered. "Help you, madam?" he asked, surprise evident in his tone. Clara summoned her most dignified manner. "I need a room for the night, please. I'm traveling to visit my sister in Helena." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "Traveling alone, madam? Unusual for these parts." "My husband recently passed," Clara explained, allowing a catch in her voice. "I'm joining my sister's household now that I'm alone." Sympathy or a reasonable facsimile appeared on the clerk's face. "Sorry to hear that, madam. We've got a room on the second floor, $1 for the night." As she signed the register with a false name, Clara casually asked, "Is there a dining room? I'm famished after my journey." "No dining room, but the Golden Nugget across the street serves decent meals." The clerk handed her a key. "Room 204, second floor, end of the hall." "Thank you." Clara hesitated, then added with calculated vulnerability, "I don't suppose you could recommend somewhere safe for a lady to dine alone. I'm not accustomed to establishments of a certain nature." The clerk's expression softened further at her apparent innocence. "The Nugget's respectable enough before evening. Just stay clear after dark when the miners come in." He leaned forward confidentially. "Though if you're worried, there was another lady traveler came through yesterday, staying with her brother, I believe. Room 206, right next to yours." "Perhaps you could make her acquaintance." Clara's pulse quickened. "What a fortunate coincidence. Perhaps I shall. Thank you for the suggestion." In her assigned room, a Spartan space with a narrow bed, washstand, and single window overlooking the dusty street, Clara quickly freshened up, considering her next move. If the girl was in room 206, and if Sloane was indeed posing as her brother, she had an unexpected opportunity to make direct contact. But she needed to be certain and careful. She waited until she heard movement in the hallway, then opened her door just as a young woman was locking the neighboring room. The girl startled visibly, a slender blonde no more than 20, dressed in a once fine traveling suit that now showed signs of hard wear. "Oh, excuse me," Clara said with genuine warmth. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I just arrived and was told there was another lady traveler. It's so rare to find female company in these frontier towns." The girl regarded her warily, her blue eyes shadowed with what Clara immediately recognized as fear. "Hello," she said softly, her gaze darting down the empty hallway. I'm Emily." "Catherine," Clara replied, using her chosen alias. "Catherine Wilson. I'm traveling to Helena to join my sister after losing my husband." She deliberately emphasized the word losing, watching for any reaction. A flicker of something recognition perhaps crossed Emily's face before she controlled her expression. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said mechanically. "If you'll excuse me, my brother is waiting for me downstairs." "Of course," Clara stepped back. "Perhaps we might share a meal later." "I confess I'm reluctant to dine alone in a strange town." Conflict was evident in Emily's face, longing for companionship warring with caution. I'm not sure my brother would approve. He's very protective." "I understand completely," Clara assured her, offering a conspiratorial smile. "Brothers can be so overbearing, can't they? Almost like having a second father sometimes." Emily's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "Exactly like that." A door slammed somewhere downstairs, making Emily flinch visibly. "I must go," she whispered, genuine fear returning to her eyes. "He doesn't like to be kept waiting." As she hurried toward the stairs, Clara called after her. "I'll be here if you change your mind, Emily. Sometimes it helps to talk with another woman who understands difficult circumstances." Emily glanced back briefly, a mixture of longing and resignation in her expression, before disappearing down the staircase. Clara returned to her room, heart racing with the confirmation of their suspicions. Emily was clearly under duress, frightened of her so-called brother. Now Clara needed to determine whether Sloane was acting alone or if Hayes was already in Blackwater as well. She waited a few minutes, then made her way downstairs and across the street to the Golden Nugget. The establishment was relatively quiet at this hour, with only a few tables occupied by miners enjoying a late breakfast or early lunch. Clara selected a table with a clear view of the hotel entrance and ordered coffee and a simple meal from a haggard-looking waitress. As she sipped her coffee, she observed a man exit the hotel with Emily at his side, a stocky figure with a dark beard, one hand firmly gripping the girl's elbow. Even from a distance, Clara could see that his grip was unnecessarily tight, his posture controlling rather than protective. They turned north up the main street, heading toward the larger buildings that Clara assumed housed the mining company offices. It had to be Sloane. The description matched Jackson's perfectly, right down to the possessive manner with his sister. Clara watched them until they disappeared from view, calculating distances and timing. It was still several hours until her noon rendezvous with Jackson, but this information was too valuable to wait. After finishing her meal and paying, Clara returned to the hotel, informing the clerk that she was going for a short ride to stretch her legs after the long journey. His warning to be careful of the mine tailings to the south confirmed the location of the cottonwood where Jackson would be waiting. Clara rode out of town casually, as if merely exercising her horse. Once out of sight of the settlement, she urged the gelding into a canter, making for the meeting point with growing urgency. Jackson was waiting as promised, concealed among the trees and brush near the massive cottonwood. His expression lightened with relief when he spotted her approaching, then immediately tensed again at her early arrival. "What happened?" he asked without preamble as she dismounted. "Are you all right?" Clara quickly relayed her discoveries: Emily's obvious fear, Sloane's controlling behavior, their departure toward what she presumed were the mining offices. "They must be meeting Hayes," Jackson concluded grimly. "This confirms our worst fears. If Hayes is here personally, the situation is even more dangerous than I thought." "We have to help her," Clara insisted. "She's terrified, Jackson. Whatever they're planning, it can't be good." Jackson nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "Here's what we'll do. You'll return to town, keep your room at the hotel. Stay visible, maintain your cover story. I'll circle around to the north side, approach the mining offices from the ridge above. If Hayes is there, I need to confirm it visually. And then we wait for nightfall," Jackson said, checking his revolver methodically. "When Sloane returns Emily to the hotel, that's our best opportunity. You create a distraction, something that separates them briefly. I'll move in and take Sloane while you get Emily to safety." Clara considered the plan. What if they don't return to the hotel? What if Hayes keeps them at the mining office? "Then we adjust," Jackson replied simply. "But my guess is they'll maintain appearances until whatever they're planning is ready." Sloane wouldn't have registered at the hotel otherwise. His confidence steadied her. "All right, I'll be ready." As she prepared to remount, Jackson caught her arm gently. "Clara," he said, his voice lower than before, "if anything feels wrong, anything at all, get out. Don't wait for me. Take the horse and ride south toward Helena. I'll find you." The intensity in his blue eyes sent a warmth through her chest, despite the gravity of their situation. "I'm not leaving without you or Emily," she replied firmly. "We're in this together now." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. His hand moved from her arm to her cheek in a brief, tender gesture that surprised them both. "Together, then," he agreed quietly. "But be careful." "You too," she whispered, suddenly very aware of his proximity and the warmth of his hand against her skin. For a suspended moment, neither moved. Then Jackson stepped back, helping her mount with professional efficiency. "Noon tomorrow, same place," he instructed, his voice returning to its practical tone. "If all goes well, we'll have Sloane in custody and Emily safe by then." Clara nodded, gathering the reins. "Tomorrow, then." As she rode back toward Blackwater, Clara found her thoughts divided between their dangerous mission and the unexpected tenderness of Jackson's touch. In the midst of peril and purpose, something else was growing between them, something neither had anticipated when he'd freed her from the auction block less than a week ago. Back in Blackwater, Clara maintained her cover as a traveling widow, taking afternoon tea in the hotel's small sitting room where she could observe comings and goings. She saw no sign of Sloane or Emily through the afternoon, confirming her suspicion that they remained at the mining offices with Hayes. As evening approached, Clara returned to her room to prepare for whatever the night might bring. She checked her revolver, ensuring it was loaded and accessible in her pocket. She arranged the pillows under her blanket to give the appearance of a sleeping form in case anyone checked her room. And she waited, her nerves taut but her resolve unshaken. The sun had just set when she heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, one heavier than the other. Her door was slightly ajar, allowing her to glimpse Sloane escorting Emily to their room. The girl looked even more drawn and fearful than before, her complexion pale, her movements mechanical. Clara caught fragments of Sloane's instructions as they passed. 1 hour, not a minute more, and when he arrives before the closing door cut off his words. She waited, counting slowly to 100 to ensure Sloane had settled, then stepped into the hallway and knocked softly on Emily's door. There was a long pause before the door opened a crack, Emily's frightened face appearing in the narrow gap. "Oh," she breathed, recognition and something like hope flickering across her features. "Catherine, may I come in?" Clara asked quietly. "Just for a moment." Emily glanced nervously over her shoulder, then stepped back, opening the door just enough for Clara to slip through. Inside, the room was nearly identical to Clara's own, but with a carpet bag open on the bed and a man's coat thrown over the chair, signs of Sloane's presence despite his current absence. "He's gone to make arrangements," Emily whispered, wringing her hands. "He'll be back soon." "Emily," Clara said gently, taking the girl's cold hands in her own. "I know you're afraid. I know that man isn't really your brother. I'm here to help you." Tears immediately welled in Emily's blue eyes. "You can't," she choked out. "No one can help me. He'll kill me if I try to leave. He killed my mother when she refused to sign over our ranch to Mr. Hayes." The confirmation of their suspicions hit Clara like a physical blow. "Your mother was one of his victims. The fraudulent debt scheme," Emily nodded, a tear spilling down her cheek. "After Father died last spring, Mr. Hayes came with papers saying Father owed him money from gambling. Mother knew it wasn't true. Father never gambled a day in his life. When she refused to pay, this man Sloane, Her voice broke. "He shot her, right in front of me. Said it was a robbery gone wrong." Clara's chest tightened with anger and compassion. "And then they took you. Hayes said I could either come with them willingly, sign over the ranch and live, or join my mother." Emily's voice had fallen to a whisper. "I've been with them for 2 months. Moving from town to town while they—" She couldn't finish. "While they continued their scheme with other widows," Clara supplied grimly. "Emily, listen to me carefully. I'm not really Catherine Wilson. My name is Clara Porter, and I'm here with a former marshal who's been tracking Sloane and Hayes for months. We're going to get you away from them tonight." Hope and disbelief warred in Emily's expression. "How? Sloane never leaves me alone for long. And Hayes is coming here tonight. They're taking me away tomorrow to someplace more permanent." The fear in her voice when she repeated their phrasing made Clara's blood run cold. "When is Sloane coming back?" "Within the hour." "He went to meet with Hayes at the mining office to finalize their plans." Clara thought quickly. "Then we need to move now. Grab only what you absolutely need. We're leaving immediately." Emily shook her head frantically. "They'll find us. Sloane has men watching the hotel, the stables. He always does." "We have help," Clara assured her, squeezing her hands. "My partner is watching the mining office. He'll intercept Sloane there, but we need to get you to safety first." After a moment's hesitation, Emily nodded, quickly gathering a small Bible and a locket from the carpet bag, seemingly her only personal possessions. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice steadier now that action had replaced uncertainty. Clara led her into the hallway, checking that it was empty before guiding her toward the back stairs rather than the main staircase. "Stay close," she murmured. "If anyone asks, you're accompanying me to send a telegram to my sister." They descended cautiously, Emily's hand clutching Clara's arm with desperate strength. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara paused to peek around the corner into the narrow back hallway that led to the kitchen and rear exit. It appeared empty. "This way," she whispered, leading Emily forward. They had almost reached the back door when it suddenly swung open, revealing a broad-shouldered figure silhouetted against the deepening twilight outside. Both women froze as Victor Sloane stepped into the hallway, his hand immediately moving to the gun at his hip when he recognized his captive attempting to escape. "Well, well," he said, his voice deceptively soft as he closed the door behind him. "What have we here? Making a new friend, Emily." "You know that's not allowed." Clara stepped protectively in front of Emily, her right hand slipping into her pocket to grasp her revolver. "Mr. Sloane, I presume," she said with more composure than she felt. "I believe you've terrorized this young woman quite long enough." Sloane's eyes narrowed, taking in Clara's stance and confidence with growing suspicion. "And who might you be? Another grieving widow passing through?" His hand remained on his holstered gun. "Except you seem remarkably well informed for a stranger." "I'm someone who knows exactly what you and Hayes have been doing," Clara replied steadily. "Forging gambling debts, threatening widows, forcing them into servitude or worse." A cold smile spread across Sloane's bearded face. "Interesting. Hayes will want to know how you came by that information." He drew his revolver with practiced ease, aiming it at Clara's chest. "Both of you back upstairs. Now, Hayes is on his way, and he'll be very interested in meeting our new friend." Clara felt Emily trembling behind her, but she held her ground. "We're not going anywhere with you." "Oh, I think you are," Sloane countered, gesturing with his gun. "Unless you'd prefer I put a bullet in you right here. Won't be the first grieving widow who met an unfortunate end in a rough mining town." Clara's fingers tightened around her own revolver, still hidden in her pocket. She had no illusion that she could outdraw a man like Sloane, but perhaps she could buy Emily time to escape. "Emily," she said without taking her eyes off Sloane, "when I move, run for the door." "Nobody's running anywhere," Sloane growled, stepping closer. "Now move." Both of the rear door crashed open behind him, slamming into Sloane with enough force to send him staggering forward. Jackson burst through the doorway, his own revolver already drawn. "Clara, down!" he shouted. Clara dropped instantly, pulling Emily down with her as Sloane whirled to face the new threat. A shot rang out, deafening in the narrow hallway. Sloane's gun discharged into the ceiling as he fell backward, a red stain spreading across his chest from Jackson's bullet. "Are you hurt?" Jackson demanded, moving swiftly to Clara's side while keeping his gun trained on Sloane's motionless form. "We're fine," Clara assured him, helping a shaking Emily to her feet. "But Hayes is on his way here. We need to leave now." Jackson nodded grimly, checking Sloane's pulse with efficient detachment. "He's dead," he confirmed, straightening up. "That complicates things legally but simplifies our immediate situation. Let's go." They hurried out the back door into the gathering darkness, Jackson leading them away from the main street toward where he'd left his horse tied in a stand of trees at the edge of town. They had just reached the relative safety of the trees when shouts erupted from the direction of the hotel Sloane's body had been discovered. "They'll organize a search," Jackson said tersely, helping Emily onto the horse. "Clara, ride with her. Head south along the creek bed where they can't track you easily. I'll meet you at the fallen pine we passed yesterday." Clara caught his arm. "What about you? And Hayes?" "Hayes will go to ground when he hears what happened. I'll follow, make sure he doesn't pursue you, then circle back." "That's too dangerous," Clara protested. "Come with us now." Jackson's expression softened for a brief moment as he covered her hand with his own. "I'll be right behind you, but someone needs to make sure Hayes doesn't follow your trail and I move faster alone." He squeezed her hand. "Trust me." After a moment's hesitation, Clara nodded. "Be careful," she urged, releasing him reluctantly. "Always am." Jackson helped her mount behind Emily, then handed her the reins. "Stay off the main trails. Keep the North Star to your left. I'll find you by dawn." With a final nod, Clara urged the horse forward, one arm steady around Emily's waist as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jackson to face whatever came next alone. They rode hard for the first hour, following Jackson's instructions to use the rocky creek bed where their tracks would be difficult to follow. The moon was just rising, providing enough light to navigate but not enough to make them easily visible to pursuers. Emily remained silent, clinging to the saddle horn with white-knuckled determination. Only when they had put several miles between themselves and Blackwater did Clara slow their pace to spare the horse. "Are you all right?" she asked Emily, concerned by the girl's continued silence. "He's dead," Emily whispered, her voice hollow with shock. "Sloane is really dead." "Yes," Clara confirmed gently. "He can't hurt you anymore." "I've prayed for this," Emily confessed, her voice breaking. "Every night for 2 months I've prayed for him to die. Does that make me a terrible person?" "No," Clara assured her firmly. "It makes you human. He murdered your mother, threatened your life, held you captive. Wanting freedom from that isn't wrong." Emily nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "What happens now? Hayes is still out there. Now we get somewhere safe. My partner Jackson, he'll make sure Hayes doesn't follow us. Then we'll take you to the territorial marshal in Helena, where you can give testimony about everything that happened." "Will they believe me?" "A girl alone." "You won't be alone," Clara promised. "I'll be with you. And Jackson has been building a case against Hayes for months. Your testimony will be the final piece needed to bring him to justice." They continued riding through the night, following Jackson's directions, until they reached the fallen pine that marked their rendezvous point. Clara helped Emily dismount, both women stiff and exhausted from the long ride. They made a small, sheltered camp in the hollow beneath the massive fallen tree, where they would be hidden from casual observation, but could see anyone approaching. As dawn approached with no sign of Jackson, Clara fought to keep her worry from showing. She had given Emily the blanket and her coat, urging the younger woman to rest while she kept watch. But as the eastern sky began to lighten, Clara found it increasingly difficult to maintain her composed facade. What if Hayes had caught Jackson? What if there had been gunfire after they left, and Jackson was lying wounded or worse somewhere in Blackwater? The possibilities tormented her as she strained to hear any sound of approach over the gentle rustling of pine needles in the morning breeze. The sun had just cleared the horizon when Clara finally heard it, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching their position. She drew her revolver, positioning herself protectively in front of the still sleeping Emily. "Clara," Jackson's voice called softly from beyond their shelter. "Emily!" Relief flooded through her. "Here," she called back quietly. Jackson appeared a moment later, looking weary but unharmed. His clothes were dusty, and there was a small tear in his coat sleeve, but he was whole and alive. Clara rushed to him before she could think better of it, embracing him with unrestrained joy. "You're all right," she breathed against his chest, feeling his arms close around her automatically. "Told you I would be," he murmured into her hair, holding her perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary before gently setting her back to look at her face. "You two made it safely. Good." Emily had awakened at their voices and now stood watching them with wary hope. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked simply. Jackson's expression hardened. "Gone. He got word about Sloane before he reached the hotel, left town with his men immediately. I followed long enough to confirm they were heading east away from our position, then circled back." "So he escaped," Clara said, disappointment evident in her voice. "For now," Jackson agreed. "But he's running scared, and we have his accomplice's body and a witness to his crimes." He nodded toward Emily. "With your testimonies, the territorial marshal can issue warrants across all Western territories. Hayes won't be able to operate openly anymore." Emily's shoulders slumped. "But he got away. After everything my mother, the other widows, he just rides away." Jackson approached her, his manner gentler than Clara had seen before. "Not for long," he promised. "Men like Hayes, when they're desperate, make mistakes, and when he does, I'll be waiting." He glanced at Clara. "We'll be waiting." Clara nodded firmly, moving to stand beside him. "Hayes's operation is finished, Emily. He can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt you and your mother. That's a victory, even if it doesn't feel complete yet." Emily looked between them, something like hope finally appearing in her tired eyes. "What happens to me now? I have nowhere to go." "First, we take you to Helena," Jackson said. "You give your statement to the territorial marshal. Then—" he glanced at Clara, a question in his eyes. "Then you come with us," Clara finished without hesitation. "At least until we find you a permanent home, perhaps with my sister in Denver." The fabricated sister from her cover story had suddenly become a possibility Clara wanted to make real. A home, a purpose beyond mere survival for Emily, and perhaps for herself as well. Jackson's expression softened as he looked at her, something warm and approving in his blue eyes. "Denver," he agreed. "After we finish our business with the marshal." They broke camp quickly after that, sharing a simple breakfast of jerky and the last of their hardtack, before setting off toward Helena. They traveled more slowly now, taking turns walking to spare the horse, no longer pursued but still cautious of possible encounter with Hayes's men. As they journeyed, Clara found herself watching Jackson the way he constantly scanned their surroundings, how he gently encouraged Emily when her strength flagged, the rare smile that transformed his serious features when something amused him. She had known him less than a week, yet she felt connected to him in ways she had never experienced with Thomas during 5 years of marriage. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Helena, a sprawling, bustling settlement that made Fort Benton look like a mere outpost by comparison. Jackson led them directly to the territorial marshal's office, a substantial brick building on the town's main street. Marshal Daniels was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, his weathered face creasing with recognition when Jackson entered his office. "Blackburn," he greeted, rising from his desk. "Been a while. Heard you were chasing that Pinkerton case across Wyoming." "Followed it to Montana," Jackson replied, shaking the marshal's offered hand. "And it's gotten more complicated. We need to talk privately." For the next 2 hours, they remained closeted in Daniels's office as Jackson presented their case Clara, and Emily providing their testimonies while the marshal's clerk carefully transcribed every word. When they finished, Daniels leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "This is bigger than I thought," he admitted, tapping the stack of papers before him. "Hayes has connections in Denver, possibly as high as the territorial governor's office. Moving against him won't be simple." "But you will move," Jackson said. "It wasn't a question." Daniels nodded slowly. "With this testimony and the pattern you've established, I can issue warrants immediately. Telegraph alerts to every settlement from here to Denver." He looked at Emily with surprising gentleness. "Young lady, your courage will help a lot of people." Emily straightened in her chair. "My mother would want that." When they finally emerged from the marshal's office, the sun was setting over Helena, painting the mountains beyond in shades of pink and gold. They found rooms at a reputable hotel near the center of town, paid for by Marshal Daniels as material witnesses under his protection. After ensuring Emily was settled comfortably in her room with a hot meal and strict instructions to rest, Clara found herself alone with Jackson for the first time since their reunion that morning. They stood awkwardly in the hotel corridor, suddenly uncertain now that the immediate danger had passed. "You should rest too," Jackson said finally. "It's been a long few days." Clara nodded but made no move toward her door. "What happens now?" she asked instead. "With Hayes still at large with Emily, now we wait," he replied. Daniels will send his deputies to follow leads on Hayes's whereabouts. Emily stays under protection until we know she's safe from reprisal. And us? The question slipped out before Clara could reconsider it. Jackson's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "That depends," he said quietly. On what you want, Clara." His voice had dropped lower, more personal. "When I tore up that servitude contract, I meant what I said. You're your own woman now, free to choose your own path." Clara took a step closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "And if my path includes continuing what we've started here, helping other women who have been victimized by men like Hayes," a smile touched the corner of his mouth, "I'd say we make a good team." "We do," she agreed softly. Neither spoke for a long moment, the air between them charged with possibilities neither had fully acknowledged until now. "Clara," Jackson began, his voice rough with emotion he'd kept carefully controlled until this moment. "I didn't expect. When I rode into Fort Benton, I was just following a lead. I never thought I'd find someone like you." Clara's heart quickened at his words. "Someone like me. Someone brave enough to face down men like Sloan, compassionate enough to risk yourself for a stranger like Emily. Someone who sees the world as it is, but still believes it can be better." He took a deep breath. "Someone I find myself thinking about even when I should be focused on other things." The simple admission, delivered with such honest vulnerability, moved Clara deeply. "I think about you too," she confessed, "more than I probably should." Jackson's hand came up to touch her cheek, a repetition of that brief, tender gesture by the cottonwood that now felt like a lifetime ago. "Is it too soon?" he asked quietly. "After everything you've been through?" Clara leaned into his touch, letting herself acknowledge the feelings that had been growing since he'd first untied her bound wrists in Fort Benton's dusty square. "My marriage to Thomas was a partnership, not a love match," she said honestly. "I respected him, and I grieved his death, but—" She hesitated, then continued with newfound certainty. "But I've felt more alive in these few days with you than in all the years before." The truth of it resonated in her chest as she spoke the words. With Jackson, she had discovered strengths in herself she never knew existed. She had found purpose beyond mere survival. And yes, she had found something else, something warming and vital that made her feel truly alive for perhaps the first time. Jackson's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch gentle but certain. "May I kiss you, Clara Porter?" he asked, formal and tender at once. In answer, Clara closed the distance between them, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, almost tentative, but quickly deepened as Jackson's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Clara felt herself responding with a passion she hadn't known she possessed, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, then into his hair. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the cottonwood," he admitted with a small smile. "I've wanted you to," Clara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. They might have stood there longer, lost in this newfound connection, had a door not opened further down the corridor, reminding them of their public location. Reluctantly, they stepped apart, though Jackson kept hold of one of her hands. "We should get some rest," he said, though his eyes suggested rest was the furthest thing from his mind. "Tomorrow we'll need to make plans for Emily, for our next steps." Clara nodded, though she was reluctant to end this moment between them. "Tomorrow, then." Jackson lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with old-fashioned courtesy that somehow managed to be both respectful and deeply intimate. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Jackson," she replied softly. As she closed her door behind her, Clara leaned against it, her fingers touching her lips where his had been moments before. A week ago, she had stood bound and hopeless on an auction block, her future foreclosed by the greed and cruelty of men who saw her as property. Tonight, she stood on the threshold of something entirely new, a future she would shape with her own hands, perhaps alongside a man who saw her as an equal rather than a possession. "You're your own woman now," Jackson had said when he freed her. Only now did Clara fully understand what those words truly meant, and the exhilarating, terrifying freedom they offered her. The next morning brought new developments. Marshal Daniels arrived at their hotel shortly after breakfast with news that telegrams had been received from 2 other settlements reporting similar fraud cases involving widows. Hayes's operation was even more extensive than they had suspected. "I've authorized a $500 bounty on Hayes," Daniels informed them as they gathered in a private parlor. "Dead or alive, though I'd prefer alive for questioning." Jackson nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. "He'll run to Denver. He has protection there." "Had protection," Daniels corrected with a thin smile. "The territorial governor's office has been notified of the investigation. Hayes's connections are suddenly finding reasons to distance themselves from him." Emily, who had been quiet until now, looked up sharply. "So he's alone." "Like he left me and all those other women. Poetic justice," Clara observed, squeezing the girl's hand supportively. "What happens next for us?" Jackson asked, unconsciously including Clara and Emily in his future plans. Daniels stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Miss Lawson should remain here under protection until Hayes is apprehended," he said, nodding toward Emily. "As for you two, officially, I can't authorize civilians to participate in a manhunt." "And unofficially," Clara prompted. "Unofficially, Blackburn here has a better record of finding wanted men than most of my deputies," Daniels admitted. "And having a woman along who can identify Hayes on sight would be advantageous." Jackson and Clara exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that felt as natural as breathing. "We'll need to ensure Emily's safety and comfort first," Clara stated firmly. "I won't leave her alone after everything she's been through." "My sister lives here in Helena," Daniels offered. "Widow herself, runs a boarding house for respectable young women. Miss Lawson would be welcome there, surrounded by other women with my deputies keeping watch." Emily straightened her shoulders. "I'll be all right," she assured Clara. "You've already risked so much for me. If you can help catch the man who ordered my mother's murder." Her voice faltered slightly before she regained control. "It would mean everything to me." The arrangements were made quickly after that. By afternoon, Emily was settled in the comfortable boarding house run by Martha Swenson, Marshal Daniels' sister. The older woman had taken one look at Emily's haunted eyes and pulled her into a motherly embrace that had brought tears to Clara's eyes. "She'll be safe here," Martha assured them as they prepared to leave, "and welcome to stay as long as needed. We take care of our own in this house." Clara hugged Emily tightly. "We'll be back as soon as we can," she promised, "and then we'll talk about more permanent arrangements." "Perhaps Denver really would suit you." Emily nodded, looking younger and more vulnerable now that she was in a truly safe place for the first time in months. "Be careful," she whispered. "Hayes is more dangerous than Sloan in some ways. Colder." "We'll be careful," Jackson assured her from the doorway. "And we won't rest until he's facing justice for what he did to your mother and the others." Their departure from Helena came at dawn the next day, their horses freshly provisioned courtesy of the marshal's office. Daniels had provided them with official documentation, identifying them as consultants to the territorial marshal papers that would give them some authority in their pursuit without directly deputizing civilians. "Hayes will head for Denver along the main stage routes," Jackson explained as they rode south. He needs to reach his remaining allies before they completely abandon him. That gives us a chance to intercept him if we move quickly." Clara nodded, comfortable now on her own mount, a steady bay mare that Daniels had selected specifically for her. She wore a split riding skirt over her trousers, practical attire that allowed her to ride astride like Jackson rather than side saddle. Her revolver was holstered properly at her hip now, and a second smaller Derringer was concealed in her boot. Jackson's insistence on being prepared for all contingencies. "How long to Denver at our pace?" she asked, adjusting her hat against the morning sun. 10 days if we push reasonably hard," Jackson replied. 7 if we really push and the weather holds. Hayes will be traveling faster, but he'll be forced to keep to the main roads because of his men and wagons. We can cut across country, intercept him before he reaches Colorado territory. And then, Jackson's expression hardened. "And then we arrest him for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. Take him back to Wyoming or Montana for trial, where his Denver connections can't help him." They rode steadily through the day, making good time across the rolling terrain of southern Montana. Clara found herself enjoying the journey despite its serious purpose, the magnificent landscapes, the physical exertion of riding, and most of all, the companionship of the man beside her. Jackson was different now that their relationship had shifted beyond professional alliance. Not demonstrative, he remained too naturally reserved for that, but attentive in small ways that warmed Clara's heart. The way he always rode slightly ahead when the trail narrowed to check for hazards. How he prepared her coffee exactly as she liked it at their morning camps. The lingering glances when he thought she wasn't looking. At night, they maintained separate bedrolls out of propriety, but they sat closer by the fire, sometimes talking late into the evening about their pasts, their hopes, the future that seemed increasingly likely to include them both. On their third night out of Helena, as they camped in the shelter of a rock outcropping beneath a vast, star-filled sky, Jackson finally spoke of Elizabeth directly. "She would have liked you," he said quietly as they sat side by side, shoulders touching, gazing into the dying embers of their fire. "Elizabeth, I mean. She had your strength of character, your way of seeing clearly when others don't." Clara leaned against him slightly, offering silent support as he continued. "For a long time after she died, I couldn't imagine feeling anything for anyone else," he admitted. "Didn't want to, truthfully. Seemed like a betrayal somehow." "I understand that," Clara said softly. "After Thomas died, even with all the complications that followed, I felt guilty for being relieved sometimes. Relieved that I could make decisions without consulting him, that I could be myself without conforming to his expectations." Jackson nodded, his arms slipping around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both protective and seeking protection. "Elizabeth once told me that love isn't about possession. It's about wishing for the other's happiness as much as your own." He turned to look at Clara directly. "I didn't understand what she meant until recently." Clara's heart quickened at the implication in his words. "And now?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Now I know she was right," he said simply. "Because your happiness matters to me as much as my own. More sometimes." The quiet declaration, spoken without flourish but with absolute sincerity, moved Clara deeply. She turned toward him, one hand coming up to touch his face, the strong jaw now familiar beneath her fingers, the slight roughness of evening stubble, the small scar near his temple that she'd noticed days ago, and now knew came from a skirmish during the war. "I love you, Jackson Blackburn," she said, the words emerging with surprising ease despite never having said them to another man, not even Thomas. "I didn't expect it, and I certainly wasn't looking for it, but here it is all the same." For a moment, he remained absolutely still as if her words had frozen him in place. Then something in his expression shifted, a softening, an opening, and he pulled her gently toward him. "I love you too, Clara Porter," he whispered against her hair. "God help me, but I do." Their kiss this time held none of the hesitation of their first. It was deep and certain, a confirmation of feelings that had grown swiftly but surely in the crucible of shared danger and purpose. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Clara rested her forehead against his shoulder. "What happens after Hayes?" she asked, the question that had hovered between them for days. "After justice is done," Jackson's hand stroked gently along her back. "That depends on you," he replied. "On what you want." Clara lifted her head to meet his gaze. "I want to continue what we've started," she said firmly. "Helping women like Emily, like me, those victimized by men who think they can prey on the vulnerable." A smile touched Jackson's lips. "A noble purpose." "And I want you," she added, a faint blush coloring her cheeks at her own boldness. "If you'll have me." "If I'll have you," he repeated with a soft laugh. "Clara Porter, I'm the one who should be asking that question. You're educated, refined. I'm just a former marshal turned bounty hunter with more scars than worldly goods to my name." Clara placed her fingers against his lips to silence him. "You're the man who freed me without asking anything in return," she corrected. "The man who taught me I could be strong when I thought I was broken. The man I love. Everything else is just details." Jackson caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm with reverence that made her heart swell. "Then yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll have you if you'll have me. Partners in every sense of the word." They held each other beneath the star-filled Montana sky, the future stretching before them with possibilities neither had dared imagine a week earlier. There would be danger ahead, Hayes still to capture, justice still to secure. But for the first time since Clara had stood bound on that auction block in Fort Benton, she felt completely, unconditionally free, free to choose, free to love, free to be her own woman with a man who wanted nothing less for her. The next morning, they continued their journey southward with renewed determination. Their relationship deepened by the previous night's declarations, but their focus still firmly on their mission. Hayes was still ahead of them, still dangerous, still a threat to women like Emily across the territories. For 7 more days they rode, following the intelligence gathered from telegraph operators and stagecoach drivers along their route. Hayes was indeed heading for Denver, traveling with 4 men and making steady progress, despite attempts to maintain a low profile. "We're gaining on him," Jackson confirmed on their 11th day out of Helena, studying tracks left by Hayes's party on a rarely used trail that branched from the main road to Denver. "These are fresh, no more than a day old." Clara knelt beside him, having learned to read signs during their journey together. "They're pushing their horses hard," she observed, noting the depth of the hoof prints. "Riding scared." Jackson nodded, a grim smile touching his lips, "as they should be. We'll catch them before they reach the Colorado border at this rate." They did better than that. Late the following afternoon, as they crested a ridge overlooking a small valley, Jackson raised his hand for Clara to halt. Below them, perhaps half a mile distant, a camp was being established beside a narrow creek, 5 men and 3 wagons. "That's them," Jackson confirmed, lowering his spyglass. "Setting up early for the night." Clara accepted the spyglass, studying the distant figures. "Which one is Hayes?" she asked, her heart quickening with the knowledge that their quarry was finally within reach. "Tall man in the black coat," Jackson directed. "Gray at his temples." Clara adjusted her focus, finding the man Jackson described. Even at this distance, there was something commanding in his bearing, an air of authority that had likely served him well in his criminal enterprises. "That's him," she confirmed, lowering the glass. I remember him from when he came to our store. He has the same cold eyes." Jackson took back the spyglass, surveying the camp with professional assessment. "They've chosen a defensible position," he noted. "Creek at their back, clear sight lines in front. They're expecting trouble. So what's our approach?" Clara asked, having learned to defer to his tactical experience in such matters. Jackson considered for a moment. "We wait for nightfall," he decided. "They'll post sentries, but the darkness will give us advantage. I'll move in close enough to hear their plans, maybe create an opportunity to separate Hayes from his men." Clara nodded. "And my role? Circle around to the far side of the creek with both horses," Jackson instructed. "Stay hidden but ready. If I manage to capture Hayes, I'll bring him to you. If things go wrong, I'll create a diversion so you can ride for the nearest settlement, Diamond Springs, about 15 miles east." She frowned, disliking the contingency that separated them. "I'm not leaving you behind." "Clara," Jackson said gently but firmly, "if things go badly, one of us needs to get away to ensure Emily's testimony isn't the only evidence against Hayes's operation. Promise me you'll go if necessary." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded reluctantly. "But only if absolutely necessary. I didn't come all this way to abandon you at the first sign of trouble." His expression softened as he reached for her hand. "I know you didn't. It's one of the many reasons I love you." They waited until dusk deepened into true darkness before making their careful approach. As predicted, Hayes had posted sentries, one on either side of the camp, but they were focused outward, watching the open approaches rather than the creek behind them. Clara led the horses on a wide circuit to the position Jackson had specified, moving with the stealth he'd taught her during their journey. From her vantage point across the shallow creek, she could see the camp clearly, the low fire, the men moving about. Hayes himself sitting apart from the others, consulting what appeared to be a map by lamplight. Jackson had disappeared into the darkness, moving toward the camp with the silent skill of a man accustomed to tracking both animals and humans across difficult terrain. Clara lost sight of him almost immediately, left with only her trust in his abilities and the steady comfort of the revolver at her hip. Time passed with excruciating slowness as she waited, every muscle tense with anticipation. The camp gradually quieted as most of the men settled for sleep, leaving only Hayes and one guard awake. Clara's attention was so focused on the main camp that she nearly missed the movement to her left, a shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows near the creek. Her hand moved to her gun before she recognized Jackson's familiar outline. He approached with careful silence, crouching beside her behind the screen of willows. "They're leaving before dawn," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Pushing straight through to Denver. Hayes is worried he's received word that the governor's office has disavowed him." "So what's our move?" Clara asked, equally quiet. "Hayes takes the first watch at midnight," Jackson explained. "He'll be alone while the others sleep. That's our opportunity." Clara nodded, understanding immediately. Less risk of casualties that way. "Exactly." Jackson squeezed her hand briefly. "I'll return at midnight. Be ready to move quickly when I bring him across." "I will," she promised. He hesitated, then leaned forward to press a swift, fierce kiss to her lips before disappearing back into the darkness, leaving Clara with the taste of him on her mouth and anxiety tightening her chest. The next 2 hours passed with glacial slowness, marked only by the gradual rotation of stars overhead and the soft sounds of horses breathing behind her. When midnight approached, Clara checked her revolver one last time and moved the horses to a position where they could depart swiftly, but silently. From her vantage point, she saw the sentry wake Hayes, who took up position near the dying fire while the other man rolled into his blankets. Hayes paced for a few minutes, then settled on a log, rifle across his knees, facing away from the creek. Clara's breath caught as she spotted Jackson's silhouette moving silently across the shallow water, approaching Hayes from behind with the patience of a hunting cat. 10 yards away. 5, 3. The crack of a breaking twig shattered the night's silence. Hayes whirled, rifle raised, as Jackson lunged forward. The two men collided, Hayes's rifle discharging harmlessly into the air as Jackson tackled him to the ground. The camp erupted into chaos, men scrambling from their bedrolls, reaching for weapons. "Run!" Hayes shouted to his men as he grappled with Jackson. "It's Blackburn!" Clara drew her revolver, uncertain whether to intervene directly or maintain her position as planned. The decision was made for her when one of Hayes's men spotted movement near the creek and fired in her direction, the bullet splintering bark from a willow inches from her head. Training took over as Clara returned fire, forcing the man to dive for cover. In the camp, Jackson had managed to subdue Hayes, pressing a knee into his back as he secured his wrists with handcuffs. But the other 3 men were converging on his position, guns drawn. "Jackson," Clara called in warning, firing again to force one man back. He looked up, quickly assessing the deteriorating situation. With a powerful heave, he dragged Hayes to his feet and propelled him toward the creek. "Move," he commanded, keeping the struggling man between himself and the armed outlaws. Clara provided covering fire as Jackson forced Hayes across the shallow water toward her position. 2 of Hayes's men followed, returning fire that kicked up water around Jackson's feet. The third circled toward the horses, attempting to cut off their escape route. "Behind you!" Jackson shouted as he neared her position. Clara whirled, spotting the third man approaching through the willows. She fired twice, driving him back but not hitting him. Jackson reached her side, Hayes still struggling in his grip. "We need to go," Jackson urged, pushing Hayes toward one of the horses. "Now," Clara turned to mount her mare, then cried out as white-hot pain sliced across her upper arm. One of the pursuing men had found his mark. Jackson's expression turned murderous as he saw the spreading stain on her sleeve. "Get on the horse," he ordered Hayes, shoving him roughly toward Clara's mare. To Clara he said more gently, "Can you ride?" "Yes," she managed through gritted teeth, the pain intense but not debilitating. "I'm fine." Jackson didn't look convinced, but there was no time for debate. He helped her mount behind Hayes, then swung up on his own gelding as bullets continued to pepper the area around them. "Hold tight to him," Jackson instructed, passing her a length of rope. "Secure his hands to the saddle horn." Clara did as directed, keeping her revolver trained on Hayes while she one-handedly bound him to the saddle. "Don't even think about trying anything," she warned their captive as Jackson fired several shots to keep Hayes's men at bay. "You won't make it to Denver," Hayes sneered, his aristocratic features twisted with disdain despite his precarious position. "My men will. Your men will be lucky if they're not hanging beside you," Clara cut him off coldly. "For Emily's mother, for all the other widows you victimized." Something flickered in Hayes's eyes at the mention of Emily, recognition, perhaps, or the first inkling that his carefully constructed empire was truly crumbling. "Let's go," Jackson said, wheeling his horse around. "East toward Diamond Springs. We'll telegraph the marshal from there." They rode hard through the darkness, leaving Hayes's shouting men behind. Clara fought to maintain her focus through the throbbing pain in her arm, concentrating on keeping Hayes secure before her on the saddle. The man had fallen into sullen silence, apparently recognizing the futility of further resistance for the moment. After several miles at a hard gallop, when it became clear they weren't being immediately pursued, Jackson called for a brief halt to check Clara's wound. "It's just a graze," he announced with palpable relief after examining her arm by moonlight. "Bleeding's already slowing." He tore a strip from his own shirt to bind it tightly. "Still, we should get it properly cleaned and dressed as soon as possible." Hayes watched their interaction with calculating eyes. "Touching," he commented sardonically. "The bounty hunter and the widow. Did you know your precious marshal's been investigating your methods too, Blackburn?" "Unauthorized civilian arrests, excessive force, save your breath," Jackson interrupted flatly. "Trying to divide us won't work. And how exactly do you plan to prove any of your allegations?" Hayes continued as if Jackson hadn't spoken. "The word of a traumatized girl. A woman who was nearly sold at auction. Hardly reliable witnesses." Clara's pain-dulled anger flared hot at his dismissive tone. "We have your forged documents," she countered. "Testimonies from multiple victims, and now we have you running like the coward you are." Hayes's confident expression faltered slightly before he regained his composure. "Circumstantial at best. My attorneys will—" "Your attorneys have abandoned you," Jackson cut in, tightening Clara's bandage with gentle efficiency. "Your political connections have disavowed you. And the territorial governor himself has endorsed this investigation." He straightened, fixing Hayes with a cold stare. "Your empire's finished, Hayes. All that remains is deciding which territory gets to hang you first." They continued eastward through the night, reaching Diamond Springs little more than a telegraph office, general store, and small hotel by mid-morning. The town's sole lawman, a weathered deputy sheriff named Callahan, was initially skeptical of their story until Jackson produced their documentation from Marshal Daniels and Hayes's wanted poster. "Well, I'll be damned," Callahan muttered, examining the papers. "We've heard about this operation. Didn't think anyone would actually catch the mastermind." While Hayes was secured in the town's modest jail, Clara finally received proper medical attention for her arm. The local doctor confirmed Jackson's assessment, a deep graze that would heal cleanly with proper care. "You're lucky," the doctor commented as he applied a clean bandage. "Half an inch to the right and we'd be discussing a much more serious injury." Clara nodded, too exhausted to respond further. The adrenaline of the night's events had finally worn off, leaving her drained and aching. Jackson, who had refused to leave her side despite Callahan's assurances that Hayes was secure, looked equally spent. "Telegraph's been sent to Marshal Daniels," he informed her as the doctor finished his work. "He'll dispatch deputies to escort Hayes back to Helena for trial. Should arrive within 3 days. And Hayes's men," Callahan's organized a search party. "If they're still in the area, they'll be found." Clara nodded again, swaying slightly as she stood. Jackson was immediately at her side, his arm slipping around her waist to support her. "You need rest," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Both of us do." The hotel in Diamond Springs was modest but clean. Given the circumstances, no one questioned the propriety of Jackson and Clara taking adjoining rooms, he as the arresting officer, she as a material witness needing protection. After ensuring Clara was comfortably settled, her wounded arm properly elevated on a pillow, Jackson lingered in the doorway between their rooms, reluctant to leave her despite his own exhaustion. "I'll be fine," she assured him, recognizing the conflict in his expression. "The doctor said it's not serious." "It could have been," Jackson replied, his voice tight with emotion he rarely displayed so openly, "when I saw you hit." "But I wasn't," Clara said softly. "Not badly, and we succeeded, Jackson. Hayes is in custody. Emily and the others will have justice." He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You should sleep. I'll be right next door if you need anything." As he turned to go, Clara called after him, "Jackson." He paused, looking back. "Yes, thank you," she said simply, "for everything." A smile, tired but genuine, touched his lips. "Thank you, Clara Porter, for being your own woman." With that, he withdrew, leaving the door ajar between their rooms, close enough for security, separate enough for propriety. Clara settled back against the pillows, her body aching but her heart strangely peaceful. They had done it. Against considerable odds, they had captured the man responsible for so much suffering. Emily would be safe. Other women would be spared Hayes's predatory schemes, and she and Jackson. Clara smiled to herself as sleep began to claim her. She and Jackson had a future to plan, one neither of them could have imagined when he'd torn up that servitude contract in Fort Benton just 2 weeks earlier. The next 3 days passed in relative quiet as they recovered from their ordeal and awaited the arrival of Marshal Daniels's deputies. Hayes remained secured in the town jail, his confident facade gradually crumbling as the reality of his situation became undeniable. His men had not been located despite Callahan's search efforts, but with their leader captured and their operation exposed, they posed little ongoing threat. Clara's arm healed quickly, the pain subsiding to a dull ache that served as a reminder of how close they had come to failure and how fortunate they had been to succeed. She and Jackson spent their days in companionable closeness, planning their next steps, discussing Emily's future, and carefully building the foundation of their own relationship. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Marshal Daniels himself arrived with 4 deputies to take custody of Hayes. "Couldn't let someone else escort this snake back to Helena," Daniels explained as they shared a meal in the hotel's small dining room. "Too many things could go wrong. Besides, I wanted to see for myself the team that brought down Coleman Hayes." "The team," Jackson repeated with a small smile, glancing at Clara. "Yes, I suppose we are that." Daniels looked between them, missing nothing. "More than a team from the looks of it," he observed shrewdly. "Can't say I'm surprised. Shared danger has a way of accelerating matters of the heart." Clara felt warmth rising in her cheeks but didn't deny the marshal's assessment. "What happens now?" she asked instead. "With Hayes, I mean." "He'll stand trial in Helena first for the Montana Territory charges," Daniels replied, becoming businesslike again. "Given the evidence and witnesses, including Emily Lawson, and yourselves' conviction is all but certain. After that, Wyoming has a claim on him for the murder of Emily's mother." "And Emily?" Jackson asked. "How is she?" "Doing well, all things considered," Daniels assured them. "My sister has taken a special interest in her welfare. Says she's showing real aptitude for teaching, helping some of the younger girls at the boarding house with their studies." Clara smiled at this news. She mentioned her mother had been a teacher before marrying her father. "Perhaps she'll follow that path." "Perhaps," Daniels agreed, "though she speaks often of both of you and your promise to visit Denver together." Jackson and Clara exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We intend to keep that promise," Jackson confirmed. "Once Hayes's trial is concluded." "And after that?" Daniels inquired, his weathered face curious. "Back to Pinkerton work, Blackburn." Jackson reached for Clara's hand beneath the table, his calloused fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that had become natural over the past days. "We have other plans," he said simply. Those plans took clearer shape that evening as they walked along the quiet main street of Diamond Springs, enjoying the cool air and the simple pleasure of being together without immediate danger pressing upon them. "I've been thinking," Jackson said as they paused to watch the sunset painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, "about our future." Clara looked up at him, noting the unusual hesitancy in his expression. "And," Denver has possibilities, he continued carefully. It's growing fast, needs people with our particular skills. Our skills, Clara repeated with a small smile. Tracking criminals and shooting straight, among others, Jackson acknowledged with an answering smile. But I was thinking more specifically about helping people who have no other recourse. Women like you and Emily who find themselves victimized by a system that wasn't designed to protect them. Clara's interest quickened. What did you have in mind? An agency of sorts, he explained, warming to the subject. Not unlike Pinkerton's, but with a different focus. We could offer services to women in difficult circumstances, investigating fraudulent claims against them, locating missing family members, providing protection when the law fails them. Clara asked softly, her heart speeding at the implication. Jackson turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Yes, he confirmed, his voice deepening with emotion. If you're willing, Clara Porter, willing to be your business partner. She clarified, though she knew that wasn't all he was asking. My partner in every sense, Jackson replied, his blue eyes intent on hers. My colleague, my friend, my wife if you'll have me. Though she had known they were moving toward this moment, the actual proposal still took Clara's breath away. 2 weeks ago, she had been a prisoner awaiting sale to the highest bidder. Now she stood beneath a Montana sunset with a man offering her not just his heart but a purpose that matched her own newfound strength. Yes, she said simply, squeezing his hands. To all of it, partner, friend, wife. Yes. Joy transformed Jackson's usually serious features as he pulled her gently into his arms. I never thought I'd find this again, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Never thought I'd want to. But you, Clara, you changed everything. You changed everything for me too, she whispered against his chest. You gave me back myself when you tore up that contract, and then you showed me I was stronger than I knew. He tilted her face up to his, searching her eyes for a moment before lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that sealed their promises more effectively than any formal document could have done. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jackson kept his arms around her waist. So, Denver? He asked, his voice lighter than she'd ever heard it. Denver, Clara agreed with a smile. With a stop in Helena to collect Emily and ensure Hayes faces justice. And perhaps find a minister while we're there, Jackson suggested, a hint of uncertainty returning to his expression. Unless you'd prefer to wait for Denver, or Clara silenced him with another quick kiss. Helena will be perfect, she assured him. Emily can be our witness, and then we'll start our new venture together as husband and wife. The following morning, they departed Diamond Springs with Marshal Daniels and his deputies, Hayes securely manacled in the prison wagon. The journey back to Helena would take approximately a week at the wagon's pace time for Clara and Jackson to further refine their plans for the future. In the evenings, when they made camp, they often sat slightly apart from the others, heads bent together over Jackson's notebook as they outlined the structure of their proposed agency, identified potential clients, and discussed how to leverage Jackson's Pinkerton connections and Clara's experience as both a victim and survivor of Hayes's operation. We'll need an office, Clara pointed out on their third evening on the trail. Something respectable but not intimidating to women seeking help. Jackson nodded, making a note. And living quarters nearby. Denver has some newer neighborhoods developing that might suit. And what shall we call ourselves? Clara asked, leaning against his shoulder as the campfire crackled before them. Blackburn Investigation sounds rather formal. Porter and Blackburn has a better ring, Jackson countered with a smile. Ladies first, after all, Clara laughed softly. Or something else entirely, something that conveys our purpose. They continued in this manner throughout the journey, building their shared vision piece by piece. Marshal Daniels, observing their obvious happiness, commented to one of his deputies that he'd never seen Blackburn so animated or talkative. "Must be love," the deputy had replied with a knowing grin. "Changes a man." They reached Helena 9 days after departing Diamond Springs, their arrival creating a minor sensation as word spread that the infamous Coleman Hayes had been captured and brought to justice. A small crowd gathered outside the marshal's office as Hayes was escorted inside, his once immaculate appearance now dirty and disheveled, his aristocratic bearing diminished by defeat. Emily was waiting for them at Martha Swenson's boarding house, rushing down the steps to embrace Clara, and then, after a moment's hesitation, Jackson as well. "You did it," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You really caught him." "We did," Clara confirmed, noting with pleasure that Emily looked healthier and more vibrant than when they'd left her. Regular meals and safety had restored some of the youth to her features that hardship had temporarily erased. Inside, over tea in Martha's comfortable parlor, they shared the details of Hayes's capture and their plans for the future. "Denver," Emily repeated when they outlined their intention to establish their agency there. "Really, Jackson confirmed. "And we were hoping you might consider joining us there, once Hayes's trial is complete. Clara mentioned your interest in teaching. Denver has several schools looking for assistant teachers, according to the newspapers." Emily's expression brightened with hope and emotion Clara suspected had been scarce in the young woman's life since her mother's murder. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Very much." "There's something else," Clara added, glancing at Jackson for confirmation before continuing. "We're getting married before we leave Helena, and we'd be honored if you would stand with us as our witness." The simple statement brought fresh tears to Emily's eyes, happy ones this time. "I'd be honored," she whispered. "When?" "As soon as possible," Jackson replied with a smile at Clara. "We've waited long enough." The wedding took place 3 days later in the small chapel adjacent to the territorial courthouse. It was a simple ceremony, attended only by Emily, Marshal Daniels, his sister Martha, and a few of the other women from the boarding house who had befriended Emily during her stay. Clara wore a new dress of deep blue silk, a color Jackson had once commented brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, adorned with small white flowers that Emily had helped select from the local milliner's shop. Jackson, standing tall and solemn before the minister in a new black suit, watched Clara approach with an expression of such unconcealed love that she felt her heart might burst with answering emotion. As she reached his side and he took her hands in his, the journey that had brought them to this moment seemed both improbable and inevitable, a series of tragic circumstances transformed into something beautiful by courage, compassion, and love. "I, Jackson Blackburn, take thee, Clara Porter, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his deep voice steady with certainty. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it came her turn to speak, Clara's voice carried clearly through the small chapel, her eyes never leaving Jackson's. "I, Clara Porter, take thee, Jackson Blackburn, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The exchange of simple gold bands purchased from Helena's jeweler, with a portion of the bounty money Jackson had received for Hayes's capture, sealed their vows. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her with a tenderness that belied the strength she knew he possessed, the strength that had saved her, supported her, and ultimately loved her as an equal rather than a possession. The small reception afterward at Martha's boarding house was a joyful affair, despite its modesty. Marshal Daniels raised a toast to the most effective crime-fighting team in the territories, while Emily spoke movingly of how Clara and Jackson had not only saved her life, but given her hope for the future. As the celebration continued around them, Jackson drew Clara onto the small porch for a moment of privacy. The late autumn air was crisp, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above Helena. "Happy, Mrs. Blackburn?" he asked softly, his arms encircling her waist. "Exceedingly, Mr. Blackburn," she replied with a smile, leaning into his embrace. "Though I believe professionally I'll remain Clara Porter if you don't mind, for the agency. Porter and Blackburn Investigations," Jackson agreed with a nod. "I like the sound of it, as do I." Clara turned in his arms to face him fully. "It's strange, isn't it? If Thomas hadn't died, if Hayes hadn't targeted me, if you hadn't come to Fort Benton that day. If you hadn't been brave enough to stand up again after everything that happened," Jackson added, his expression growing serious. "Clara, when I said you were your own woman that day, I had no idea how truly remarkable that woman would turn out to be." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "And when you freed me, I had no idea I was meeting the man who would help me discover what freedom truly means. Not just the absence of bondage, but the presence of choice, of purpose, of love." Jackson turned his head to press a kiss into her palm, a gesture that had become as familiar and precious to Clara as breathing. "To freedom, then," he murmured. "And to us." "To us," she echoed softly, rising on tiptoe to meet his kiss as the first evening star shone down upon them, a beacon of light marking the beginning of their shared journey. 2 months later, as winter settled over the Western Territories, Clara stood at the window of their newly established office in Denver, watching snow fall gently on the bustling street below. Behind her, Jackson was arranging their modest furniture, a desk for each of them, chairs for clients, a filing cabinet for their growing collection of cases. In the apartment above the office, Emily was preparing for her first day as an assistant at the nearby school, her excitement palpable despite her nervousness. She had flourished in the weeks since Hayes's conviction and sentencing in Helena, gradually reclaiming the youthful spirit that trauma had temporarily suppressed. "What do you think?" Jackson asked, interrupting Clara's reflections as he hung a simple painted sign in the window, "Porter and Blackburn Investigations." Beneath the name, in smaller letters, "Specialized Assistance for Women in Difficult Circumstances." Clara turned from the window to survey their small kingdom. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, built on principles of justice, compassion, and the simple belief that every woman deserved the freedom to shape her own destiny. "I think it's perfect," she replied, moving to stand beside her husband. "A place where women like me, like Emily, can find help when the law fails them." Jackson slipped an arm around her waist, his expression thoughtful as he gazed at their names painted side by side. "You know, we may not change the world with this," he said pragmatically. "The system that allowed Hayes to operate is still in place. The laws still favor men over women in most matters." "I know," Clara acknowledged, "but we'll change some worlds, one woman at a time if necessary." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence at her side. "And that's enough to begin with." Jackson pressed a kiss to her temple. "More than enough." Their first client arrived that afternoon, a widow referred by Marshal Daniels, facing eviction based on allegedly forged property documents. As Clara welcomed the nervous woman into their office, She felt a profound sense of rightness settle in her chest. This was why they had been brought together, to transform their own pain and loss into something that could help others. To ensure that no woman who came to Porter and Blackburn investigations would ever hear the words that had once defined Clara's existence: property, debt, ownership. Instead, they would hear the words Jackson had spoken when he freed her from that auction block in Fort Benton. "You're your own woman now," words that had changed everything. Words that had set them both free.